I've always said you've got to be careful of what and who you follow, because you're always given your leaders. If they're wealthy and become even more wealthy, then it's a good chance, very good chance, they're being groomed, produced for you, and you're seeing the polished, managed product. Really is how it is. It's quite an amazing system we're living within, though, because there's never been so controlled as it is today. Because there's so many, there's so many of these stars out there across the world today, in every country. Polished, managed, often belong to the same organizations across the world. They're all on board with the same things to guide the public that follows them. And for every fractured part of society, whichever you belong to, every little fractured part, because they've divided society up into all kinds of little subgroups. They've already got leaders out there for you. It's quite beautiful in a sense. If you're a master manipulator to observe this, that's what you're seeing, how it's done. And it works awfully well, doesn't it? Where politicians now really, you'll notice that with the last the US election there with the midterm and other elections across the world, you're not getting what they can do or what their background is, what they can do to serve any public. That pretense is even gone. They're giving you what's really a made product. It's a star type thing, man or woman or whatever it happens to be, or whatever it's called. They're this or they're that, where it's either the proclivity for a particular sexual thing or whatever. That's like their qualification. What's going on here? Who cares what they do? And no, the fact is, can they do the job to serve the public? All the public. It's not even asked anymore, because there's no real pretense they're there to serve anybody except themselves and their masters. That's really how bad it is today. But getting back to all of that, the big think tanks, the big think tanks like the Royal Institute for International Affairs, CFR, and all of the other groups that they own, it's a big consortium of groups and specialized think tanks for different specialized problems and so on, or areas. The same guys who set up the United Nations and run that too at the very top, and the banking system, they never believed in democracy. I've mentioned this so many times before. The Club of Rome, if you read their own books, will tell you that the problem with the world, as far as they're concerned, is this silly thing called democracy. They can't get anything done. But then they're a branch of a think tank that works for the Royal Institute for International Affairs, CFR. And you'll find that the Royal Institute for International Affairs, long ago, back in the days of Carter, Jimmy Carter, I think it was, came out with not just the CFR group that most of the media is all involved in, and power, really people who influence society belong to it, and the big moguls of corporations and business. But they also created the Trilateral Commission, and the Trilateral Commission are the real technocrats behind the scenes, who are not elected by anything, they're appointed, and and the public often don't even know they exist. But they go across the world deciding on collapsing economies or working at central banking systems, and even replacing prime ministers in some countries who are default on loans, national loans, and replacing them with their own technocratic bosses that are unelected, straight in. They're put straight in by the central banks that run the country. Now, there's too much to just talk, because this is spontaneous, pretty well spontaneous when I'm talking about you. But there's so much involved in this, I might do a couple of shows, I don't know. But here's the thing. If we go into the actual talks of some of the top leaders we've had, some of them we still have, in fact, other ones have died recently, even Zbigniew Brzezinski, who again was a technocrat, remember, who was plucked out of a top university, and he was put up there in the CFR and the Trilateral Commission. He came out with a very Adam Curtis like proclamations and visions of the future were very similar to Curtis's stuff, because they all come from the same milieu of how do we run the world, how do we control the public, how can we divert the public, how can we give the public vision that will be in our interest to rule over them, etc., etc. And even though they use democracy, and they'll even use your national military as a pretense of using democracy, but it has nothing to do with that. It's for gain, of course. Then you come back to any reality at all. For instance, here is a quote by Zbigniew Brzezinski, and it was in the 1970s from the book Between Two Ages, and America's role in the technotronic era, he called it. Now, technetronic, he called it NE-tronic. He said was a system, and he mentioned it, where radio waves, as an example, different kinds of quiet weaponry, could be used across nations, including your own one, and they could basically control the minds of the public, at least the emotions of them, make them placid or angry, depending on the frequency, and things like that. It's a weapon system. Weapons don't have to completely disable you or make you bleed or kill you. A weapon is used to coerce you and force you into doing something, where they just point at you and tell you what to do, or, or you don't even know what's happening to you. It's still a weapon. But anyway, it's also to do with control. It's always control, where you point a gun at someone to make them do something, or a microwave weapon, the thermal weapons that they've shown on television umpteen times that make your skin superheat, etc. And they can step it up to any frequency they want, by the way, or whatever it means they're going to use. But the fact is, the technotronic era, he says, involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Okay? For the harder thinking, I'll repeat that again. The technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Controlled society, right? Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Soon it would be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. So let's break it down again here. This guy was up there, way up yonder, with all the different top military organizations on their panels at the very top, and all the agencies, telling you how it is now. But he was mentioning this back in the 1970s, when he wrote this book. The technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Gradual appearance. It's got to be gradual, because if it's sudden, you might notice it and complain. So you just adapt into it. Gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Now, traditional values, that's the rights of humanity. They couldn't be crossed before. So this group would be unrestrained by traditional values. Traditional values, the rights of the individuals, that wouldn't stop them doing what they wanted to do with those people. They can do what they want. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen. In the 1970s, and maintain up-to-date complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. Now you go back to one of his predecessors working in the big global system, working on the culture and the minds of the public, Lord Bertrand Russell, who also belonged to the same global elite of Royal Institute for International Affairs. He also worked for MI5 at very least, maybe MI6 too, during World War II at least. And he fills the exact title of being, or the exact role of what Carroll Quigley talked about, that where he said that our organization, that is secret to an extent, it's semi-secret, but he said that in his own writings, in his own book. He said it has existed for almost 60 years. He wrote that in the 60s, 1960s. This book. This is Carroll Quigley I'm talking about now. And he said it's often mistaken for the communists. What he was referring to there was that the Rees Commission that had done investigation into the tax-free foundation supporting the far left, the communistic sects, And what he's pertaining to is that's really us running things. And he said that we have the same kind of goals. Socialism is the best way to control people, for those who are the experts and the rich on top, if you understand that. Anyway, getting back to Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell said back in the 1940s and 50s, in his big part, for he worked with the Macy Group, the Frankfurt School, all these different big groups that were meant to change culture and society. And Lord Bertrand Russell said that shortly, with the proper techniques, anyone can convince anyone else of anything. He's talking about the ability to do complete persuasion and be completely believed by anybody and everybody at the same time with scientific techniques. Long before Brzezinski here, but Brzezinski would have all his inner writings, Quigley's writings and Lord Bertrand Russell's writings. Of course he would. It's the same organization behind it all, with the same goal. Now, what else did Brzezinski say in his books? People in governments and economies of all nations must serve the needs of multinational banks and corporations. People, governments, and economies of all nations must serve the needs of multinational banks and corporations. He also said today it's infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. And he also said, speaking of a future at most only decades away, an experimenter in intelligence control asserted, I foresee a time when we shall have the means and therefore inevitably the temptation to manipulate the behavior and intellectual functioning of all the people through environmental and biochemical manipulation of the brain. Very similar in some ways, again, to Bertrand Russell long before him. And that's no coincidence at all, actually, because Russell also said that by means of injection, and he's talking about medications, but injection, they can control people. Environmental and biochemical manipulation of the brain. He also said we have a large public that is very ignorant about public affairs and very susceptible to simplistic slogans by candidates who appear out of nowhere, have no track record, but mouth-appealing slogans. Isn't that ever, ever, ever true today?
We're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice.